welcome. Today, we journey into a land of giants and tiny men, of talking horses and floating islands, a world known to millions, Gulliver's Travels. It's a story we think we know. The shipwrecked sailor, Lemuel Gulliver, waking on a beach, tied down by 1,000 tiny threads, a prisoner of the miniature Lilliputians. For 300 years, it has been a fixture of the nursery, a classic children's adventure. But its author, Jonathan Swift, the fiery dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin, never intended to write a bedtime story. He intended to forge a weapon. And if he could join us from across the centuries, he would not be pleased by our interpretation.
Pleased? You imagine I would be pleased to find my grand assault upon the follies and vices of mankind reduced to a picture book for slobbering infants? It is the most exquisite, most damnable irony. They have taken my lion, pulled its teeth, clipped its claws, and presented its stuffed carcass as a child's plaything.
Born in 1667, Jonathan Swift was a master of political pamphleteering, a clergyman, and perhaps the greatest satirist in the English language. His travels were not an escape from reality, but a savage confrontation with it.
I wrote to vex the world, not to divert it. Each voyage, each character, each absurd detail is a mirror I hold up to the reader, a mirror designed to reflect the grotesque face of human pride, hypocrisy, and delusion. And where better to begin than with the absurd pettiness of power?
This brings us to the first voyage, to Lilliput, on the surface, a whimsical adventure, a land where men are but 6 inches high, and Gulliver is a benevolent man-mountain. He discovers a civilization in miniature, with a pompous emperor, intricate court ceremonies, and simmering political tensions that seem, to Gulliver's eyes, almost comically trivial.
Comical? Of course it's comical. It is the court of King George I, seen through a reducing glass, a nest of strutting insects, puffed up with their own importance, yet utterly insignificant. Their grand palaces are dollhouses, their armies are a swarm of gnats, and their political divisions, a farce of the highest order.
Swift uses the Lilliputians to parody the bitter political divisions of his own England. The two great political parties of the day, the Whigs and the Tories, are represented by a disagreement over fashion.
The Tremexan and the Slamexan, the high heels and the low heels. One party believes the heels of their shoes should be higher, the other lower, and for this earth-shattering difference they conspire against each other, refuse to eat in the same room, and would happily plunge their nation into civil war. Tell me that does not perfectly capture the meaningless squabbles that pass for statecraft in your own time.
The satire cuts even deeper when it targets religious conflict. The Great Schism in Lilliput, the source of a bloody and intractable war with the neighbouring island of Blefuscu, is based on a disagreement over how to crack an egg.
Ah, yes. The big Indians versus the little Indians, a sublime model for the schism between Catholic France and Protestant England. All that holy war, all that righteous fury, all that blood and treasure squandered over a point of doctrine so profoundly idiotic, it could only have been conceived by man. Gulliver outlines the tragic history.
Here is a quotation from the text.
The primitive way of breaking eggs before we eat them was upon the larger end, but His present Majesty's grandfather, while he was a boy going to eat an egg, and breaking it according to the ancient practice, happened to cut one of his fingers. Whereupon the emperor his father published an edict commanding all his subjects, upon great penalties, to break the smaller end of their eggs.
The text goes on to count the cost of this decree.
It is computed that 11,000 persons have, at several times, suffered death, rather than submit to break their eggs at the smaller end. Many hundred large volumes have been published upon this controversy.
11,000 martyrs. for an egg? Does it not make you weep for the magnificent stupidity of our species? I made them tiny for a reason. Their bodies, their cities, their wars, all are minuscule, and through them I force my readers to see their own world, their own vainglorious conflicts, for the insignificant trifles they truly are.
In Lilliput, Swift holds up a magnifying glass, shrinking powerful men to expose their small vanities. But Gulliver's journey was just beginning. Ahead lay a land where he would be the one who was small, and the flaws of humanity would be writ terrifyingly large. Next time, we journey to Brobdingnag, the land of the giants. If the first voyage to Lilliput showed Lemuel Gulliver the absurdities of human pride from the perspective of a giant, his second voyage would shatter that pride completely. Shipwrecked once more, he finds himself washed ashore in Brobdingnag, a land where the roles are violently reversed. Here, the people are 60 feet tall. A field of wheat is like an impassable forest. A common rat is the size of a large dog, and a house cat, a terrifying predator. Gulliver is no longer the mighty man mountain. He is a curiosity, a plaything, a fragile insect scurrying under the feet of giants.
Of course I turn the tables. It is the most effective rhetorical trick in the book. Hold up a magnifying glass to a man's face, and you will see every pore, every blemish, every flaw in grotesque detail. I simply did the same for the whole of mankind. When you are small, your vices seem small. But when seen from a great height, our vanities, our cruelties, they become monstrous.
Gulliver is eventually discovered and becomes a pet at the royal court, kept in a specially made travel box and looked after by a young girl named Glumdalclitch. He is presented before the King of Brobdingnag, a thoughtful, philosophical monarch who is fascinated by this tiny, perfectly formed creature.
My poor Lemuel, even when reduced to the size of a man's thumb, his pride remains immense. He puffs out his chest and begins to lecture this wise king on the glories of Europe. He speaks of our trade and our wars, our parliaments and our courts of law. He describes the advancements of our society with such earnest pomposity, utterly blind to how it all sounds to an outsider.
Gulliver, eager to impress upon the king the sophistication of his homeland, details the English constitution, its recent history, and its political factions. He even offers to share the secret of gunpowder, describing cannons and modern warfare as a great tribute he can offer from one king to another. The king is not impressed. He is horrified.
He offered him gunpowder, the fool. He offered the engine of all our modern butchery as a gift, a marvel of ingenuity. He thought he was showcasing our power, but all he did was reveal our depravity. The king, in his wisdom, saw it for exactly what it was.
After patiently listening to Gulliver's extensive accounts of European life, the king takes him in his hand, strokes him gently, and delivers a calm but crushing verdict on Gulliver's entire species. This is a quotation from the text.
My little friend Grildrig, you have made a most admirable panegyric upon your country. You have clearly proved that ignorance, idleness, and vice are the proper ingredients for qualifying a legislator, that laws are best explained, interpreted, and applied by those whose interest and abilities lie in perverting, confounding, and eluding them. I observe among you some lines of an institution which in its original might have been tolerable, but these are all blurred and blotted by corruptions. It doth not appear from all you have said how any one perfection is required toward the procurement of any one station among you. By what I have gathered from your own relation, and the answers I have with much pains wringed and extorted from you, I cannot but conclude the bulk of your natives to be the most pernicious race of little odious vermin that nature ever suffered to crawl upon the surface of the earth.
The most pernicious race of little odious vermin. With that single phrase, the mirror of Brobdingnag is held up to humanity, and the reflection is not flattering. Gulliver's entire world, everything he held as noble and civilized, is dismissed as a pestilent infestation.
Was the king wrong? I think not. He simply stated the plain truth as he saw it. When you strip away the self-aggrandizing language we use to dress up our affairs, what is left? Vermin in a frenzy. That is the truth I wrote, and it is a truth that stings as much today as it did then.
Gulliver's travels did not end with the giants of Brobdingnag. After a series of further misadventures, he undertakes a fourth and final voyage, one that would strip away the last vestiges of satire and reveal a core of pure, undiluted misanthropy. He arrives in a land ruled by the Yahoos, a race of intelligent, rational, and perfectly virtuous horses. Their society is a utopia of reason and order, free from lies, greed, or conflict.
Ah, yes, perfection, a world built on pure reason, just as the philosophers of my age demanded. No passion, no vice, no humanity. I gave them their utopia on a platter, and they found it utterly horrifying.
But this land is also home to another species, vile, degenerate, brutish creatures who serve the Yahoos as cattle. They are driven by base instinct, filth, and an insatiable greed. They are called Yahoos.
At first, Gulliver sees them simply as repulsive animals. He feels a natural revulsion, as any man would. But he doesn't see the truth. Not yet. He cannot bear to see the reflection in their greedy, mud-caked faces. It is the horses who point it out. They look at Gulliver, and they look at the Yahoos, and they see the same form, the same shape, and suddenly the mirror is shoved in his face and it cracks. These creatures, this is humanity in its natural state. This is what we are beneath the fine waistcoats and powdered wigs. Filth. Naked, unaccommodated man is a Yahoo.
The revelation destroys Gulliver's sense of self. He begins to see the poison of the Yahoo in his own reflection. Swift spares no detail in his description of the creatures. Here is a quotation from the text.
Upon the whole, I never beheld in all my travels so disagreeable an animal, or one against which I naturally conceived so strong an antipathy. They were of a brown-buff colour, but filthy from head to foot. They had beards like goats, and a long ridge of hair down their backs, and the foreparts of their legs and feet. But the rest of their bodies were bare, so that I might see their skins. They climbed high trees as nimbly as a squirrel, for they had strong, extended claws before and behind, terminating in sharp points, and hooked.
Gulliver comes to adore the rational Yahoos and despise his own kind. When he is eventually exiled and forced to return to England, he is disgusted by the sight of his own family, whom he can now only see as Yahoos in clothing.
And what was the world's response to my final verdict? To this unflinching portrait of their own souls? They put it in the nursery. They read it to their children as a grand adventure, a funny story about little men and big men. They delighted in the fantasy and willfully ignored the warning. I held up a mirror, not a telescope. I showed them the savage lurking in their own hearts, and they thanked me for the charming fairy tale. So be it. Let them have their comforting lies. The truth does not vanish simply because it is ignored. The Yahoo is not on some distant island. He is in your cities, your courts, and your governments. and he always will be.